If you would like to earn CPE credit for listening to the show, visit earmarkcpe.com/FPA. Download the app, take a short quiz, and get your CPE certificate. Finally, if you enjoy listening to FP&A Today, please go to your podcast platform of choice, click the subscribe button, and leave a rating and review of the show. And now, on to the show.
From data rails, this is FP&A Today.
Welcome to FP&A Today. I'm your host, Glenn Hopper. Today, we're joined by Tariq Munir, an international keynote speaker and a columnist for CFO Magazine Australia and New Zealand. With over 2 decades of experience at multinational corporations, including PepsiCo, AkzoNobel, and PwC, Tariq has dedicated his career to transforming finance operations and building digital-first cultures. He's especially passionate about helping finance leaders navigate the path from traditional processes to digital transformation, not just through technology implementation, but through the critical cultural and mindset shifts required for success. He brings a unique perspective on building digital literacy in finance teams. Tariq, welcome to FP&A Today.
Thank you, Glenn. I'm so glad to be on the show today.
Yeah, I mean, I say it all the time. I love this show because I feel like I'm a lot of times I'm preaching to the choir and get an opportunity to speak to kindred spirits and people who are as passionate about this stuff as I am. And just from the from our pre-recording conversation, I feel like I've got a lot to learn from you today. So very honored to have you on.
Same here, Glenn. Same here. I look forward to our conversations. I'm sure we are going to enjoy it a lot, and there'll be a lot of takeaways for us, for both of us, and for the audience as well, of course.
So I think you and I had a similar shift where, yes, we're still finance people, but we're like the finance tech stack people, and we're focused on data and automation and a lot more than just traditional, debits and credits and variance reports and all that. So talk to me about sort of your transition. What inspired it going from the more traditional finance roles to becoming a digital transformation leader?
So Glenn, I'm an optimist in technology. Right. So I do firmly believe that technology, especially the general purpose technologies we talk about like AI, cloud computing, has this potential to transform how we work, interact, create, and for good reasons, right? I'm very confident that these technologies are going to create a future of abundance, prosperity, and will solve some of the most complex human and business problems that we face today. So that's what inspires me, that as a leader, we need to craft a future which is both enabled by tech and humanistic in its center and its core as well. And I do believe that we need more business leaders focused on creating such a future as opposed to just doing the debit credits and stuff, of course. So we can shape up the future in a way that is both tech enabled, of course, and that is also solving some of the most complex problems that we are facing. And to be honest, that's what inspires me. That is what, wherever I have seen an opportunity, I have raised my hand, and it has put me or landed me in places and roles that involve digital transformation in one way or the other. So that's something that drives me. That's more of my mission as well. That's how I keep myself inspired to keep going on this journey, in other words.
And for me, a lot of it was necessity in that transition. And I found that gaining efficiencies come from, well, first off, because I was in the startup space, and you've got the advantage of being at massive companies that have all this wonderful data. My initial, my first CFO role was at a company that was doing under 10 million in revenue, and we just didn't have a lot of data. So it was kind of a blank slate in trying to figure out how to report when, a company's on QuickBooks and GL is kind of the only data you have, trying to build out that architecture. But when you're trying to raise money and trying to present as if you're a bigger company, you've got to be able to have some kind of data that you can report on. So building out that was important, but also not a lot of resources. So you start thinking about software and automation and, well, is there something off the shelf we can use, or do we have to build something? I imagine it's different being at such a large company running digital transformation versus being at a startup, because it's like, startup being the speedboat that you can quickly turn, but these big companies, it's like turning a battleship. It's a massive thing to transform it and change the company. Tell me about like doing digital transformation at a large company. What are some challenges that you face there that you may not in the in smaller companies that are able to be maybe a little more nimble?
You are absolutely right, Glenn, and you pointed it out very well that data, of course, there is a lot of data, but data has both sides, right? It is an opportunity if you look at it, but it's a challenge as well when you look at it the other way. So again, a lot of things based on my experience, what I have seen that, and in many roles that I have done, a lot of insights actually reside somewhere in, they are there, but they reside somewhere in complex Excel models, in disparate systems which are not talking to each other, or things like reconciliations and so on and so forth. So I have seen a lot of work, or a lot of focus being done on carrying out, just reconciling and doing all this work, which is more of a manual core accounting piece, as opposed to then creating value for business, which is more around business partnership and those areas. And there's nothing like, I'm not saying that it's right or wrong in a way. It's just that the nature of many of the finance functions that I see today, that is how finance functions are unfortunately operating. So data is a big challenge, I would say, that one faces. And then of course, when in a bigger organization, you have matrix structures, you have a different way of navigating digital transformation, as opposed to maybe in a smaller organization where you have a much nimble approach towards decision making and moving faster. So in a bigger organization, you need to have a much more coherent approach, a much more clear vision of where you are trying to go, right? How do you actually get there, having a clear roadmap? So all those things are become even more important in bigger organizations. In a smaller organization, of course, as you rightly pointed out, it's nimble. You can move fast. You don't have to uh, think about a lot of different areas of the organization, because it's small in its very nature as well.
Yeah. You said data has both sides. And one thing is, but at the big organization, the one advantage you do have is more data. And data, we talked a lot before the show about AI, and everybody's talking about AI with generative AI, but you and I were talking more classical AI. And you said, you called yourself a traditionalist, which I would completely agree with that. And I think, and we'll talk about it more, but I think that something that people have a hard time with is classical AI, machine learning is a deterministic science
Mm.
versus generative AI. It's you could get a different answer each time, and there's obviously guardrails in ways that you can use it for finance. But let's back up and talk to me about what you mean when you say you're a traditionalist when it comes to AI in finance. Like, explain why you believe finance departments need to focus on traditional machine learning before they jump into the generative AI side.
Yeah, great question, Glenn. First of all, let me clarify one thing. I have no doubt on the potential of generative AI, right? Being all in for technology, and how I talked about how technology can revolutionize what we do. So no doubt about that. But having said that, as I already mentioned, that many organizations today, finance, in fact, some of the studies also suggest that around 40 to 50% of the time, finance is still spending on transactions, right? Mostly transaction processing, or the other problem around inefficient processes, right? Again, I mean, that's one of the challenges many finance functions face over the period of time. M&As, acquisitions, and just by organic growth itself, things have become so complex that we waste a lot of time in those areas. Now, what generative AI has done, unfortunately, I say, is that it has diverted the business leaders and finance leaders' attention from these core problems, right? What it has done, that are starting to see this sexier interactive AI experience. They have started to have that experience where you can actually talk with AI, it responds, you see the result right away, instead of a traditional AI where you need to do all those boring stuff and you don't really see an output in a way that you actually see in a generative AI, which is very, very interactive and very on the spot output, on the spot result. Now, it's a dangerous trajectory, I say. Reason being, a technology with a lot of potential, no doubt about that. When we put disproportionate resource and attention on generative AI, which has less potential at this stage for the traditional processes like transaction processing, process improvement, those kind of reconciliations and stuff. When we put disproportionate amount, we see the organizational technical debts keep on increasing, and then we see that, most of the projects getting into the what we call a pilot purgatory, right? So that's a dangerous trajectory to be on. What unfortunately generative AI has done is move that shift, move that attention. So I hope it makes sense to put some of the context around why I feel that generative AI is probably doing a little bit more harm than some of the benefits that we are actually able to reap today.
Yeah, and actually, maybe now it's a good point. So, for finance professionals who might be new to the space, I mean, again, we are finance and accounting people, not machine learning engineers.
Yeah.
So, explain the difference between the differences and their respective applications of classical AI, machine learning versus new generative AI.
No, absolutely. So, as you mentioned as well, that traditional AI or machine learning, what we say, is more deterministic in nature, right? It learns based on historical data, and then it predicts output based on a very specific outcome. It can predict results, it can classify information, or it can detect anomalies, for example, right? It is of course powerful at pattern recognition because it is an AI, it is a machine at the end of the day, and it can carry out complex analytics as well. So for instance, if for in a traditional view in a machine learning, if you want to predict your future cash flows or identify a fraudulent transaction or segment your customer based on purchasing patterns, you need to write down that algorithm, and that is the output it will give you. For a specific cash flow forecast, it can tell you, okay, this is how your next 3 months look like from a cash flow point of view, for instance, right? Generative AI, on the other hand, as the name suggests, it can generate new content, right? So, for instance, predictive analytics can give us a cash flow for the next quarter, but then generative AI can then go a step further and can provide recommendations based on the, of course, all those language or large data that it has been trained on the large language models it's based out of. And then it can also provide summaries or variance analysis and anything that can generate a new content. Now, having said that, today most of the technologies or the underlying architecture that sits under traditional AI is also part of the generative AI, right? So a generative AI effectively can do predictive analytics in a way, and then the layer which actually works around this generative part can sit on top of it, with whom a CFO or a team can interact to actually interact with those numbers. So it pretty much adds a layer. If we step back a little bit, the core still remains that traditional AI. The core of finance transformation or business transformation still sits with that customer segmentation, cash flow forecasting, process mining, for example, process optimization, and so on and so forth. Generative AI on top of it at this stage is more of how do you actually interact with those results and then come up with new ideas, maybe.
Right now, it feels very, you can do a lot of parlor tricks with generative AI. It's like a magic trick, and you can impress people and you can do some pretty amazing things, but it's not going to be fully mainstream. And don't get me wrong, I'm all in on give your teams access to a generative AI tool, make sure it's in an enclosed environment where it's not, the data is not going to
Yeah.
be leaked out and used to train models and all that. I think that it's generative AI in finance and accounting isn't going to be wholesale widely adopted until it's integrated into the software that we already use. So Data Rails, has AI built in where you can ask it questions. And I think you're going to see ERPs, CRMs, Salesforce, obviously huge on generative AI, and as is Oracle with NetSuite, and the list goes on. But I think you're going to see those software engineers are going to put it into their systems you're already using. So if you're used to seeing a dashboard that is, giving you two-dimensional view where you can, dashboards, you can click in and see additional data. What you're going to start seeing, though, is the ability to get even more detail in natural language. So you're not having to write a SQL query. You're not having to know Python to be able to slice and dice the data. It's going to be integrated there. And if companies have their own machine learning, data science, BI teams, they're going to build applications internally. If they don't, though, they're going to have to wait for these software providers for it to come out.
Absolutely, yeah. So true, Glenn. That's the thing, right? I mean, what I do firmly believe as well is the convergence of the technologies, right? And that's where the real benefit comes into play, right? When we actually start seeing different kind of ERPs and traditional AI and generative AI all converging into one, evolving, just like human evolution, like AI is like an inorganic being, and it is evolving. However, I do call it that it's currently from a traditional AI. If traditional AI is a single cell amoeba, then the generative AI is nothing but a multicellular organism, still far away from becoming a human, as we tend to believe. Or we actually think like it's so advanced that it can pretty much solve all our problems. It's more about taking a reality check that yes, it is cool, but not so cool to solve everything that we have today.
Yeah, and that's why I always push for, if you're going to be using these tools, especially if you're going to be kind of out on the leading edge using these tools, you have to understand how they work. Not saying you have to be an engineer, but if you're going to be using these tools to analyze data and all that, you have to understand roughly how it's working.
True.
Otherwise, you can't tell the auditor, how did I get this number? I put it in the magic black box and this is what came back. I mean, that's not going to fly. But it is. I also, because I talk about this a lot, I do get opposition from, mostly it's the more senior, seasoned finance leaders who say, I spent my career learning to be the best, finance and accounting person I can. I'm not a computer developer. If I wanted to do that, I would have gotten a master's in computer science, not in finance or whatever. FP&A Today is brought to you by Data Rails, the world's #1 FP&A solution. Data Rails is the artificial intelligence-powered financial planning and analysis platform built for Excel users. That's right, you can stay in Excel. But instead of facing hell for every budget, month-end close, or forecast, you can enjoy a paradise of data consolidation, advanced visualization, reporting, and AI capabilities. Plus, game-changing insights giving you instant answers and your story created in seconds. Find out why more than 1,000 finance teams use Data Rails to uncover their company's real story. Don't replace Excel, embrace Excel. Learn more at datarails.com. I know with your digital transformation work, you're very passionate about upskilling finance leaders. And I'm wondering if you see that opposition, and if so, how you overcome it. What are key challenges to build that sort of, I call it digital literacy, and get that mindset among finance people to speak this language and use this technology? Like, how do you help finance professionals kind of evolve themselves and transform themselves to be able to understand and work with all this?
A lot of this apprehension towards digital literacy, or this protected turf kind of a thing, that yes, this is my turf is accounting, I need to focus on that one. This is technology, I don't need to know about it, I have IT, I have stuff. A lot of that is coming out because of, number one, a fear of unknown, right? People don't know, we don't it's a lack of understanding, I would say, that how much, and you rightly pointed out as well, that how much digital literacy is needed. Actually, do I need to know how to code? Because if, for example, if you are asking a CFO who has been in the role for 20 years, or who has a 30 years experience, I mean, you will talk about digital literacy, and the first thing that will pop up will be probably to her will be that, I need to start doing the coding, right? She might not be interested in that. Okay. So I believe first of all it's important, and that's what I did some of the I led a couple of initiatives around building a digital literacy and a digital mindset within the organization, within the finance team, specifically a big APAC finance team. And I believe the first and foremost thing was to educate people on in understanding that what is actually a digital literacy all about. For a finance person purview, what it is all about. And as you also mentioned, it is not about coding. It is simply understanding, as a rule of thumb, it is simply understanding that how the output of an algorithm or machine can help you solve your specific business problems. That is it. It is all about just understanding that. It is about understanding how machines are calculating and arriving at those insights, how data is generated, categorized, stored, and then consumed within the organization. That is all we need to know as a finance leaders. Once you build that clarity that this is what we talk about when we talk about digital literacy, it opens people up. It makes them warm towards, yes, this is something I can learn, right? This is something I would like to know. Now, the next hurdle comes. Once you do that, the next hurdle comes. You have we are fortunate and both unfortunate to be living in a world which has an overload of information. It is very hard today to go out, and if you want to understand something, if a finance person wants to know what to do with for example, what to learn about AI, there will be thousands of training courses available out there. So I do believe that where we need to focus, and that is what I personally have done as well, that instead of we have a lot of content already on the internet and everywhere. So creation of content is not an issue, and quite a good quality content available everywhere. It's all about curating the right content for the right people. So that is where I do believe we need to put our focus more, and that is where I have put our focus, and that has worked. Actually, people appreciate that things bringing out in front of them, which are very clear pathways, which are clear roadmap towards their upskilling journey. Yes, you need to put a lot of work and a planning behind that, but once you do that, you can build that culture. One thing I would, however, like to mention here as well, and that's to your initial point also around that leadership piece as well, is about building a continuous learning culture within the organization. Right? That's the key. Now, one misconception, and I'm also a culprit of that, right? I wouldn't say that that's just others. I'm also included. A misconception around being continuous learning is that the more hours we clock or the more number of certificates we earn in a month or in a year, that means we are becoming a continuous learner. Unfortunately, that's not true. Continuous learning is all about how much we are willing to update our knowledge and our assumptions in the light of new knowledge. So when we are exposed to something new, are we ready to stick to what we know, or we are ready to open up ourselves and update our assumptions? And that is where the leadership role comes into play. So leaders need to lead from the front and demonstrate that continuous learning behavior. That yes, I don't know everything, and I'm okay to go back and learn more. And when you say that yes, I'm open to learning, your team will say I'm open to learning as well. And that's how you create a digital culture. How you create a continuous learning culture, or a digital mindset in the organization.
That's very Bayesian of you, the idea of updating updating your thoughts based on the new knowledge as it's presented. It's almost cliche now. People say it all the time of, oh, business is moving faster than ever. And, I feel like we've been saying that for 30 years. We've been saying digital transformation for 30 years. And what I found a few years ago is when I would say digital transformation to people, they would say, I feel like we already digitally transformed. I feel like we did this in the late 90s. And I think it's because if you say transformation, people think of it as one and done, already transformed. But it's kind of like it goes hand in hand with the continuous learning.
True.
CPAs obviously have their CPE credits. They have to keep learning. If you're just a finance person, as I am, there's no professional mandate that you keep learning. But if you don't keep learning in finance, you're going to be, whether it's the latest software that's available, the latest methodologies that are available, you're going to get left behind. So it's interesting how digital transformation and continuous learning go hand in hand.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, it does. They have to go hand in hand, because otherwise, because see, at the end of the day, what happened in 90s, and I totally agree, and I can totally resonate with that. Most of that was the first layer, first wave of digital transformation, I would say, which was mostly centered around ERPs and mostly around accounting systems, reporting system consolidation, and so on and so forth, which was very digital in nature. There was a transformation element, but it was very digital in nature. It was a one set deterministic piece of technology. You put in, it goes live, and it performs in a certain way. AI or cloud computing, these are entirely different ball games. You have to continuously evolve yourself. So I always say that digital transformation is more about transformation than actually digital. It's just that we have to put a word to it, right? So
Yeah.
to make it so that it makes sense.
And I do want to we'll in a few minutes, we'll get to the sort of the non-tech part of digital transformation. But I do a couple more questions on generative AI, just because, I love when we have a guest of your caliber on and we can talk about this. Before the show, we were talking about that McKinsey case study about using generative AI in the M&A process. And I think, as someone who's done a lot of transactions over my career and thinking about the long days and the late nights and putting together data rooms back in the days when a data room was actually a physical room. But tell me about that case study and kind of walk us through how AI is transforming the M&A landscape, everything from target identification to post-merger integration.
That's a very interesting case study, actually, I came across. And as you pointed out, that in M&A, you first step is probably to find the potential targets, right? To know what you are looking for, which industries to target, which specific stage an organization is, whether it's a startup or it's in a growth phase, or a more mature organization. So McKinsey published this study some time ago. They have a proprietary tool which scour through and sift through a vast amount of data of different repositories out there, and it scours through thousands and thousands of potential targets. And then, based on the specific acquisition criteria, it then creates a list or more of a visualization of, if you actually search out the M&A McKinsey, it has a very good visualization of how it actually tags all those different targets based on their different characteristics or different criteria. And then once you do that, you can actually then shortlist those based on certain prompts on what are those out of those, say, 1,000 or 2,000 potential targets. You bring it down to 30, 40, 20, whatever is your specific criteria. Now that's one part of it, right? On the other hand, where it is actually creating a lot of benefit and productivity is around the due diligence process, summarizing your key documents. Like, I mean, you can imagine in M&A how many documents you have to sift through, right? What are the potential risks? You don't have to have a highlighter to highlight each and every contract, right? You can draft initial memorandums. You can research relevant legal and regulatory information, which is sitting probably outside of your internal databases as well. And generative AI can do that. There are techniques there. Now, another way they are actually helping their organization is around analyzing a lot of past M&A performance, and then based on that, they are able to generate personalized training programs for the new people, for the onboarding of the employees. And then it also helps them with the integration piece, right? Because again, at the end of the day, once everything happens, you have to integrate the new organization into it. And it can actually, based on the different M&A playbooks that the organization have, or the different policies, procedures, and frameworks have, it can actually bring out that, okay, these are the nuances. This is how different organizational structure. The new organization, this is the structure of the organization. This is the structure of your organization. How we can bring it in line. It can recommend you that some of those integration it can give you an advice acts as more of an assistant for you on that one. I do believe it can revolutionize the M&A space, and it can create a lot of productivity in that space. It makes our lives more humanistic. I know how much time M&A people spend in in actually going through a transaction. When it's a transaction is happening, that's their life. But I do believe that again, AI has that potential to make it more humanistic for people as well, so that they focus on the areas which are more important, which are more human, which are more value added, as opposed to just sifting through the documentation and everything.
During the time of due diligence and going through an entire transaction, you still have to do your normal finance and accounting tasks. You still have to close every
Yeah.
period, and you have to do your reporting and your forecast. Let alone what's going to happen post merger. And I think about the expectation that we do all that, and then in recent years, ESG has been thrown on top of us, and
Mm,
across the board, talking to CFOs, you think, okay, this is in the office of the CFO. How? I mean, and I guess because it's tied to compliance, which goes into the CFO, but now you have this whole new level of work that has to be done. And I know another area where generative AI, we could potentially uh, see some efficiency gains would be in the ESG
mm.
reporting. So, how do you see generative AI helping finance leaders address ESG reporting and sort of mitigate kind of the greenwashing risks and everything around ESG?
You are absolutely right, Glenn. This is a new role coming up, right? And the from an organizational placement point of view, CFOs are the ones who are actually most of the organizations. CFOs are the one who are eventually responsible for the reporting piece, the compliance piece, to ensure that there is no greenwashing happening. And we have seen lately, even in Australia, we saw some of the fines through the regulator on some of the organizations going through that greenwashing. Now, intuitively, when we think about generative AI, I mean, similar to how we talked about M&A, that is how it works, right? I mean, intuitively you can train it on the data, and it can then help you with all those compliance related stuff and audit. But it is good to understand what the way I see it will work out from a more technical perspective as well. So for example, there is this technique called retrieval augmented generation, right? Or RAG. You would of course know about it. So where a large language model is trained on a company specific static data, your policies, your procedures. But we know that in ESG space, a lot is happening outside of the company domain, right? There is so much of regulatory updates, and then there will be uh, publishing from other similar organizations in a public listed space, their reports, their data. You are doing scope 3 emissions, which are you are not really able to control. So how do you bring that up to date information into your large language model, which is residing within your organization? And that's where this RAG technique comes into play. And without going into a lot of technicalities or details, it's pretty much plugging into, for the audience, it's more about plugging into an external data source, which always stay up to date. And then you can bring that external data source within your large language model, which is being used for your internal reporting and stuff. Through your internal model, you can do all the reporting and analyzing and summarizing of the stuff. But then through the external data, you can bring in sources like corporate reports, regulatory filings, industry standards which are changing, or any regulations which are being passed on. So that can create a holistic view of how do you take your ESG, not just from a reporting perspective, but from a compliance and a strategy perspective as well. And that is where I believe the future is going to move towards. And I know there are solutions out there which are actually working towards that space of building RAG capability within the local large language models, and take it to that level where you can actually build that visibility. And what it does is also that, again, in for not just for finance, for everyone, it is important. Accuracy is important. We have this concern around hallucination, around incorrect outputs, and large language models are designed to give you an output, and one way or the other they will just give you an output whether it's correct or not. RAGs can actually help bring that piece of sanity within that large language models. And that's very important from an ESG point of view, from a greenwashing point of view, because you are now more and more organizations, and it is now becoming part of your public statements that you are issuing, right? So it's your part of your earnings call, for example, now. So it's as important as any investor making a decision based on your quarterly earning. Now investors are making decisions based on how you are reporting or what are you doing on your ESG fronts. So that's why it becomes very critical and very important to be 100% accurate and not just rely on probably element, and maybe look at different ways of doing it. And RAG is, I suppose, is one of those ways it can actually transform.
Yeah, and that's really where it's going to start making a lot more sense is when you're using RAG and you're using AI in your workflow and where you have live data coming into it. So, updates to accounting regulations, updates to policies and all that, where it's in the workflow where you don't have to kind of stop and step out and go use this bot over here that's querying our vector database of these RAG files and everything, where it's just all seamless. And I think it's coming sooner than later.
Yeah. And I think one very important aspect is also that whenever a regulation change or whenever something major happens outside of your static data, you don't have to retrain your entire large language model.
Right.
That's a cost in itself as well. It's not a small and easy thing to do. So you don't have to do that, and you are always plugged into that. And it's a very fascinating technology. It's a very fascinating technique to bring that in. And you're right. I mean, it'll help us with that workflow and so on.
Yeah. Going from that to really thinking about integrating. So I know you have a background in supply chain finance and FP&A and reporting. And I think about, and maybe you've got some examples, but if you can think about some of the kind of the biggest data and process challenges that you encountered in knowing what you know about generative AI and kind of seeing the path there, how could you see emerging AI technologies addressing those issues that, years ago would have been that gave you heartburn years ago, but now maybe there's a shining star at the end into this future where we see potential solutions that technology will bring for us?
I guess data, we saw data was one of the problems. And of course, I mean, we can see today, we can find today that AI is actually helping a lot with harmonizing the data and, creating those workflows of data. And that's where I generally mostly talk about is that at the end of the day, transformation is all about a mindset shift, right? Yes, it is a lot about technology. And one key mindset shift that we need to make is around process excellence. And that is where finance or any business function, to be honest, for that matter, is struggling, right? Our processes are so complex. They are, over the period of time, they have become so integrated or disintegrated with each other that it becomes very difficult. Using a technology might not help. It will actually, as Bill Gates said, would actually probably augment or amplify its inefficiency as opposed to eliminating that. I always talk about this very exciting technology, not a generative one, but of course, generative can always become remember, generative can always be a layer on top of it, right? So at the core, what I believe that technologies like tools like process mining and task mining, they are some real game changers that can actually help address some of those biggest challenges. So I had this experience working on a process mining, for example. That's just fascinating to see that how within a system, how many touch points a certain document has. Where does it go from where, and what's the workflow? It's like a revelation that comes to you. And then based on that, you can then simplify your processes. And once you are able to simplify your processes, putting technology on top of it becomes relatively much easier, and you are able to actually extract more benefit out of that. So that's my one learning, I would say, or one key area that I do believe that technology can help us shift. If I had that technology like maybe few years ago, I might have done a few things in a different way.
We're preaching to the choir here, but I love that you can separate the technology from the transformation, because to me, so many people think that software is just going to be a magic wand, or AI is going to be a magic wand, and you just buy this one piece of software and it's going to fix all your problems. But really, you have to back up and identify the processes and find where the bottlenecks are and where the roadblocks are there, because otherwise, on what cause are you picking your software? You have to know what problem you're trying to solve, then buy the software to solve it or build the solution. To that end, you have a whole framework for how CFOs should approach leading digital transformation initiatives. And it's more than just a technology. So can you expand on that a little more too, on that framework?
I would love to. I would love to, Glenn. And you are absolutely right. And I am a huge proponent of this point of view that digital transformation is technology can only take you so far. If you are not solving the right business problems, if you are not identifying the right business problems, and you do not have the right mindset and behaviors within the organization, no technology can do anything for you, whether it's the most cutting edge generative AI models, or it is the traditional AI we're talking about, or some simple workflow automation. The way I look at it, the way I talk to CFOs around how to approach their digital transformation journey is a much more holistic view. So I'll give you a very brief of that framework, of course. First of all, is around having a very clear vision. Now, majority of and right now today, I was reading this report, which was published, I think, couple of weeks ago or couple of months ago. 80% of AI projects are still failing, which is twice the rate of normal IT projects. In fact, 84%, a vast majority of the reasons of the top reasons were people not leadership not understanding the capabilities of what AI can and cannot do for them, trying to solve problems which are not actually AI problems, or even at some point overestimating AI capabilities. So the first step I always recommend to CFOs or business leaders is around crafting a very clear digital vision. Understanding why, starting off with your why you need to transform, what is it, that bigger picture, what does technology got to do with all of that? And in other words, we need to paint a picture where if anyone in the organization looks at that vision, they care about that vision. That why as to they should be bothered about transforming. It should be moving, it should be very specific. And then comes the building the roadmap part, or building the action plan part. That's where the key action, as the name suggests, that's where the key action happens. And unfortunately, that is where we generally start off in a reverse manner, where we start off with the technology and end up trying to solve a problem. While we need to start off with the other way around, identify all your business problems, create a register of your business needs, move on, go on to the next step on mapping your AI capabilities with whatever your technological capabilities are at the moment, what you need to build, and then identify some quick wins. Again, quick wins, I always say that, and I repeat that pretty much in every talk. I say that quick wins are not the smallest projects in a smallest possible time. They are the smallest project in the shortest possible time with the biggest impact. So they need to have an impact. They must be solving a business problem, otherwise they are not a quick win. They are just they can be a momentum builder or something, but they are not really a quick win. So go for those quick wins and then iterate, do it in 3 to 6 months, 3 to 6 month iterations. The third element of the framework that I refer to is around engaging the organization. It's all about communication. How do you, some of the tips I always give is around having some key digital ambassadors or key digital evangelists within your organization who are tech savvy, of course, and they are not necessarily part of the leadership. They should not actually be part of the leadership, because they can actually help spread your word around transformation, building that culture amongst their peers. So they work really well in that space. And even you can go a step further. I have seen successful organizations using crowdsourcing, internal crowdsourcing, to craft their digital vision or craft their digital transformation journeys. This helps organization with owning, or finance functions with owning that digital vision or owning that digital transformation. The fourth element I always refer to, and that is probably one of the most important one, is governance. Now, governance is not just about having covering the risk or privacy or security. Yes, that's one element of it. Governance is also about how are we tracking against all the projects, where who is responsible who is that one person or or that group of people who are responsible for the digital, for leading the digital transformation. Many a times I have seen those failures happening because there is no one person who is responsible for delivering or accountable for being delivering the projects. There is no clear RACI, for example, right? Responsibility, accountability, and those roles are not defined. So that's very important. Understanding what your key KPIs are that you are trying to achieve, what is the measures yet that you are trying to improve, for example, right? Whether it's just your financial measures or it's your non-financial measures, which includes your org health scores or your employee engagement and so on and so forth. And lastly, the last element of the framework that I always refer to, and I do call it as the base of everything, is about building a right to succeed. And when we say building a right to succeed, it means building a digital mindset. What we all talked about in the in the previous discussion as well, around building a digital mindset, having a continuous learning culture in the organization, and very importantly, having a psychological safety for people to come up with the ideas, to bring out new things, giving them permission to fail. When we talk about failure and when we talk about finance, people suddenly start jumping on their seats that, oh, it's finance, we don't have a permission to fail. But it's not about mindlessly doing or failing in your core work or your regulatory compliance and stuff. It is about giving yourself permission to experiment and acknowledging that yes, if you are doing experiments, some experiments will be success, some experiments will be failures. So having that psychological safety that people are able to take that risk, that calculated risk, is also very important. So yeah, this was the very high level of the. I hope I'm making sense. It's a lot of information, but I just wanted to bring it to one piece within few minutes.
Yeah, and that was great. And I think there is one piece of that that is easy when you're in project planning to underestimate how significant this is. You know, we talked about you doing Power BI implementations and when you were an advanced analytics lead, and we talked about change management and building user adoption. And it's so, I mean, there are people like I've had to deal with like saboteurs who are so upset about something in their job changing that they're going to try to derail the whole project. Are there any takeaways in your implementations where you learned how to best manage change management around this and to help people? And you mentioned the quick wins too, and I think that that's always a way.
Mm,
And sort of
mm,
having the
mm,
ambassadors out there and not trying to do it as a one person, like, you know, everybody get on board my train, here we go. Whereas
yeah.
you're making converts as you go. But is there, I mean, anything you can say about kind of change management and building user adoption on these new technologies?
I think, Glenn, it all comes to the basics. What I have learned over my past years of experience, what we generally tend to do whenever we are looking at a project or when we are trying to solve something, we tend to, as a humans, we tend to superimpose our perception or project our perception or project what we are thinking. Right? We make an observation, we draw a conclusion, and then draw a conclusion that that business is facing a certain problem, and then that's what we project across everywhere. Now, that might not be, and that's the problem. That might not be the problem which your stakeholder is actually facing. So, the first step, and that's where I cannot stress that enough, is anchoring everything into specific business problems. Now, change management, of course, is a big subject. There are so many techniques out there. But again, the basics remains the same, understanding what your stakeholders want, creating a dashboard which is giving an information, or even if it has an element of that generative AI of interactivity, if it is not solving the business problem of your stakeholder, you will have that pushback from them. You can never bring people on board if you are not trying to solve their problem. And it's basic human nature or basic human psyche, right? If someone is trying to solve my problem, I would always try to side with that person. That, I would think highly of that person, that yes, you are trying to solve my problem, this is what I have. So spending time with your stakeholders is very important. As a finance team, we love to spend time at the back end and try to come up with different solutions and look at technologies as well as different things. That's great. But till the time we go out and talk to our stakeholders and understand specifically what do they need. And all that they need might not be doable or might not be true. There might be some, and you sometimes realize that the problem that they have is probably something which is more of a behavioral issue of certain people or some process issue, and not really has to do with any dashboard, for example, or any technology for that matter. And many a times that has happened. I have done workshops, I have done full day working with workshops with business leaders and finance leaders. Many of the problems come out to be either a misconception, or two people did not just end up talking to each other for a very long period of time and realize that no, if they would have just talked to each other, the problem would have already been solved. So to manage the change, I think the most important thing is to manage people expectation and understand their problem, where they are coming from, what is in it for them, what problem are we trying to solve for them to make their life easier. And that's how it sticks, and it has worked for me. I mean, it's my personal experience, but that has worked for me. I hope that helps.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's great advice. And it always surprises me because I always just think, all right, we're all going to get on board and be excited. But it seems inevitably there's going to be at least one person or a pocket of people who are digging in their heels and do not want to change anything because this is the way I've always done it. And this is the way that I want
Yeah.
to keep doing it. And I don't like change. So we're getting really long here, but I do want to squeeze one more question in before we get to kind of our personal fun questions, just because I know you are out there keeping up with the latest in technology. So just I'd love your take on looking ahead 3 to 5 years from now. How do you see the role of finance professionals evolving as AI and automation and this technology is just changing so
Mm,
rapidly? What do you see happening to the role in kind of the traditional finance functions and what we're outsourcing to the robots versus what we're doing?
absolutely. So, Glenn, organizations of today or finance functions of today are no longer just typical input. You process something and you create an output, or just for that matter, people and processes, or technology. It's a complex interplay of humans, algorithms, digital networks, on top of all those people process systems that we have been talking about. Now, what technology is doing is what Kareem Lakhani and Marco Iansiti refers in their book Competing in the Age of AI. It pushes labor towards the edge of the processes. And that's a great book, actually. I always have that in my
Yeah, I'm looking for it on my shelf right now
yeah,
behind me.
and I
I've got a
always
signed copy.
have it as a reference. It's a
Yeah.
great book, amazing book. This point, and it's so amazing. And when I apply that to finance, I think of it. Yes, if we automate our core, which is the core is what is our core? Our core is our accounting transaction. That is what we tend to believe what finance is all about. And in a way, it's a reality as well, right? The traditional finance. So if we can automate that core and we build a digital operating model which is digital to its core, finance professionals will move towards the edge of the finance, towards the edge of the process. And beyond that edge lies different functions like sales, marketing, category operations, and so on and so forth. So effectively, we will move into the right place where we should be, which is the people facing position, in other words. So we will be moving from our core work, manual work, into more business facing roles, which lies towards the edge of those processes. And that is where we want to be. And I do believe firmly that, believe it or not, AI will increase our human interaction, as we will see more and more finance people moving into these meaningful roles, into these meaningful places towards the edge of the processes. It will make us more human because we will be able to interact more with our business partners as opposed to sitting in the back end and just trying to do transactions and stuff, or creating reports or building dashboards. We have this obsession for dashboards, building dashboards, right? We need to get again, maybe a discussion for another day. I would like to point out a couple of things that will be needed for the future of these finance leaders to survive and thrive in that world where we are in those business facing roles. We need to be emotionally intelligent. We talk about technology and we talk about, okay, technology nothing to do with emotions, but it's very important. We need to have emotional intelligence, being aware of what our actions are doing to other people. We need to build digital mindset. We talked about we need to have a continuous learning mindset. And very importantly, we should be able to think critically. Technology will give us output. We should be able to evaluate what that output means in context of the business problem we are trying to solve, or in context of the business partnership that we are trying to do. So this is how I believe that the role of finance is evolving.
That's great. Great insights and great book. We need to put a link to that book in the show notes, the link to the McKinsey study.
Yes, absolutely.
And all that as well. Yeah. Getting to our boilerplate questions, I always love to see what kind of responses we get on these. So the first one is, what is something that most people don't know about you, something we couldn't learn just by searching you on Google?
Okay, it's very hard to say that you can't find anything on Google about about someone today. In one way or the other, you will be on Google. But okay, I will tend to believe that it's that's not the case, and Google does not know about everything about me. So one thing I love is I love doing oil portraitures. So actually, in fact, all these paintings that you see at the back, they are all mine. And this is something I just enjoy, as it creates a lot of mental space for me when I'm not talking about technology, when I am not reading into the thick subjects around AI, machine learning, and retrieval augmented generations and stuff.
Oh, that's great though. That's a perfect balance of right and left brain too. It's just that way you get to fully remove from it. Those are beautiful from what I can see. So if there's and our final question is always where people can learn more about you. Do you have any of your artwork posted online that people could check out, or
on my Instagram there is some.
Okay. The last question that we ask everyone, and we haven't talked really about Excel at all. We've been all in technology, but what is your favorite Excel function and why?
Oh, always VLOOKUP.
Yeah. So I just had this conversation with someone the other day. I'm a VLOOKUP guy too. And someone told me that's how you show how old you are. Because everybody else now, is going to do index match or power query or whatever. Yeah. But
Even
I'm going back to the old days.
I know
the
there is
90s.
now an XLOOKUP, which is much more efficient. But again, if over my last 20 years of career, VLOOKUP has saved me thousands and thousands of times. So I think I still regard that as my go-to for now.
I love it. I haven't heard VLOOKUP in a while, and I'm so excited because that when I was a guest on the show, that's what I answered with too. And I really, when someone told me that the other day, it never occurred to me, but that is how you show you've been doing this a long time, is when you're dropping the VLOOKUP, I think. So, yeah. So Tariq, great episode. I guess our last question, just how can our listeners connect with you and learn more about you?
Of course. So best way is, of course, on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, so you can always reach out, DM me there, or otherwise, my email address is pretty simple: hello@tariqmunir.me. Or you can also go on my website, which is www.tariqmunir.me. But I guess for a quicker response, generally it's easier on LinkedIn or just DM me, and I always respond to people. I'm generally good at engaging with the like-minded people out there.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. Great episode. Loved your insights and experience, and I love your oil paintings too. Learn something new every day.
No, same here, Glenn. It was so it was a revelatory. There were a lot of revelatory moments for me, and I learned a lot as well from our conversation. I really enjoyed it. So yeah, looking forward to it coming online soon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.